So for the last few weeks, this is week number 6. For the last few weeks, we've been in a series called Leverage. And it's leverage, meaning that you've got some help coming in these few weeks to make some tough decisions. See, actually what we've been covering is some of the tough decisions that we face in our lives. And every one of us faces difficult decisions all the time. And they come in two main forms. Form number one, you're at a crossroads and there's a path over here and the path over here, and you have to choose which path you're going to walk down. And this path over here looks like the right path, but it feels less fun. And this path over here looks like the wrong path, but it feels more fun. And you have to make the decision, am I going to take the path I want to take that isn't what I should take, or am I going to take the path that I should take but I don't want to take? You know, that's a difficult decision. Or maybe you're facing a difficult decision where you're at the crossroads and you're looking down both paths, or maybe there are 3 or 4 paths, and you just have no idea which is the right path. And you look down them all and they all look roughly the same, and it's like multiple choice, A, B, C, and D. Just always pick C. You know, just go with it. Always pick C. But no, actually in life, you can't just always pick the third option. It doesn't work that way. So you're wondering about all this stuff. And so what we've been covering the last few weeks is how do you get the leverage to make the decisions that you should make at the right time when you should make them, no matter how difficult the decision seems to be. And we covered a few weeks ago, one of the key things I challenged you on is that your first and most important decision has to be a decision for stability. We've been using this metaphor of a trebuchet, you know, this ancient machine that throws rocks like 300, 400 yards into castle walls and knocks them down and stuff. And it's just a really big lever. That's all it is. It's a really big lever. So on the one side, you've got this heavy rock or something, and on the other side, you've got a light rock and a long arm. And so when the heavy rock pulls down, the long arm flings and the light rock shoots really far. But it's based on the principle of leverage. And just to remind you, by way of review, what that principle is all about, you need 3 things to make a lever work. Number 1, you need stability. There's got to be some type of firm, solid ground in order for a lever to work. In the case of a trebuchet, if the machine itself isn't sturdy, and I mean sturdy and huge and strong, then when that rock on the one side starts falling down, the whole thing's going to crumble and the wrong people die. That's just the way it works. So you need stability. That's number 1. Number 2, you need a pivot point. In order for a lever to work, you have to have some place where it turns. And in the case of the trebuchet, it's over here. The long arm is over here, and it's going to pivot and throw the rock. Finally, you need a push in the right place. You need a little bit of push in the right place. And that's when the rock falls down, it's got to fall down in order for the small rock to be thrown. That's what the principle of leverage is all about. You need stability and strength. You need a pivot point, and you need a push in the right place. So when we apply that to the decisions that we make in life, we've been covering these same 3 topics the last few weeks, and those same 3 topics are 1, where do you get stability? Stability, as I've said, comes from your convictions. There's got to be something in your life that is so strong that when you crumble, it stays. There's got to be something in your life that is so strong that when the uncertainty comes, that never gets uncertain. There's stability there when you've got a conviction that goes beyond yourself. I challenged you a few weeks ago to make that conviction be God's word, that you would choose first and foremost that your authority would be God's word. Now, some of you in this place this morning aren't Christians yet, and that's cool with us. We love the fact that you're here exploring with us. And I want to let you know right now that what we're talking about in this series, what we're talking about today, there's some stuff that comes out of this collection of books that we have. And we call it God's word because we honestly believe it comes from God. But if you don't believe that yet, I'm just going to let you know something. You're off the hook for today. You don't have to do what we're about to talk about. But if you do, I think it'd work for you anyway. But if you're a Christian, this is required for you. Because this is what the book says. You know, this is what God tells us. And he uses people to tell us this stuff. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. But anyway, I said a few weeks ago that God's word needs to be your first and foremost commitment. And that if that's the case, every other decision gets easier. Secondly, I encouraged you that when it comes to the pivot point, every decision that's a difficult decision is difficult largely because you don't know all the answers. And so in order for you to make those difficult decisions better, you need to get more information. So the pivot point in your lever, in your life, is to learn something. When you face a difficult decision, you need to learn something new. What new information do I not know? And then finally, the push in the right place is you need some people in your life who can kick you in the ribs now and then. You need some people, you need relationships, someone who can just poke you, someone who can just kick you, someone who can give you a push in the right place to get you started. Now, today, I hope to push you. That's my job. I'm using this opportunity here to push you a little bit, but before I push you, I'm going to give you a little bit of stability and hopefully give you a pivot. And we're going to talk about something new. Last week, we talked about this concept of the Sabbath, taking a day off every week to actually not work, to devote that time to God, to give that time to God and say, God, you're in charge of my life for this next week. And so I encourage you to do that. Now, some of you in this room, I know, struggle with that. You face a whole week long, you've worked all week, and at the end of the week, you're like, I'm still not done. So I got more to do. And so you want to work through the weekend. You want to work, and if you had your choice, you would just keep working all the time. I know some of you are like that. And for you, taking a Sabbath is hard. But for some of you, your problem isn't taking a day off. Your problem is getting something done on the other 6. Your problem is waking up, getting out of bed, heading out where you need to go, putting in the time, and getting the work done. Now, I don't know if that's you or not, but sometimes that's me. I want to tell you a couple stories just to sort of set the tone for what we're talking about today. 3 stories. First of all, because I'm a pastor, I regularly get phone calls from people who are asking for help. Phone calls from people who are asking for a little bit of assistance or maybe a little bit of perspective, or they just can't make some decision and they're coming to ask for help or something like that. And so in the last 10 years or so, I have been in touch with a lot of people who fit the same profile, but I'm going to tell you about one of the guys that I knew. About 5 years ago, I knew this guy. He and I were friends kind of for about 18 months. At the end of that 18 months, he had kind of a disagreement with me about something that was going on with the church, and so he decided to go on to some other greener pastures for him. And, you know, he and I still maintain a little bit of contact through Facebook, but it's rare. But anyway, for about 18 months, I knew this guy. And in the 18 months that I knew him, about roughly a year and a half that I knew him, he had 3 major career changes. 3 major career changes in 18 months. When I met him, he was broke, had no job, was living with a friend of his, and had no money whatsoever. You know, just bumming off his buddy. And in the process of me getting to know him, I began to learn a little bit of his past, and pretty soon he got a job. And the first job that I remember him having was he was working at like a nursing care facility. You know, where he got a job and it was like long-term care for elderly people, and he was one of the people who was doing nursing care there. Now, he wasn't a nurse, wasn't trained to be a nurse, but, you know, he's trained enough, I guess, that he could be in this process, and he was working there. Well, after about a month, he began to complain about his boss not liking him and about this other person not liking him, and lo and behold, it wasn't too long after that where he wasn't working at that place anymore. And that meant he wasn't working anywhere anymore. And a couple months later, I found out that he was enrolled in an EMT class, and he was training to be an EMT because he thought he could get his EMT certification, get a job there. Honestly, I have no idea where that went, because after the class was supposed to be over, he still wasn't doing anything, and he didn't have any kind of job. Until towards the end of my time knowing this guy, he got a job driving a semi-truck for a moving company. And that was all wonderful for about a week and a half until his coworkers started complaining that he wasn't working very hard. So he started complaining to me about his coworkers, telling the boss that he wasn't working very hard. And lo and behold, the boss sided with the coworkers and fired him. And why in the world would this kind of thing happen to him again? And I talked with him and I found out that before I knew him, he had run a trucking company that somehow, I don't know how, ended. And he didn't have that company anymore. And then towards the end of my time knowing him, he was telling me that he had a relationship with a professor at Purdue, and the two of them had come up with this great business plan, and they were going to start a new company from scratch, kind of like a major transit company, a logistics kind of company, trucking things all over the place. I think it was something like that. And he came to me asking for some advice at some point in time. You know, does this look like a good business plan? And all I remember is the whole time I knew this guy, He didn't have a single stable job. Now, why does that happen? Well, I don't want to judge that right now. I just want to share with you a couple more stories. The next story I want to share with you happens in 1995. I decided it would be awesome, since I was a sophomore in college, it would be awesome to spend that summer living as a beach bum. See, I'm from Southern California, but I was going to school in Chicago, and I decided that I wanted to go back to California and experience the beach bum kind of life, because everybody aspires to that when they grow up. I made this agreement with my buddies in school. I said, we should just move out to California for the summer, get jobs, and live in some ramshackle house or something, all of us together pooling our money. And when summer came, I was the only one still willing to do it. So I went out there and I found a church and I said, hey, can I be a worship leader intern at your church? And I knew this guy just very little bit, and he said, okay, I guess that's fine. And I said, I need a place to stay. He goes, well, find one. And so anyway, it developed a little bit, and it turns out there was a family in the church that let me bum with them for a month while I was looking for a real job. And it took me 4 weeks to find a real job, but after 4 weeks, I was hired on to 2 different places. I was working at Structure, which was a retail clothing store that is now called Express Men, because Structure wasn't good enough, and I was part of the problem. You have to sell things to stay in business, and that was not what I was. I won't tell you how many things I did not sell. We'll just say that. But so anyway, I was working at Structure, but I also got this other job at Carl's Jr. Are any of you familiar with Carl's Jr.? Oh, yeah. So anyway, Carl's Jr. bought out Hardee's, and so they brought the messy hamburgers here to the Midwest. Do you remember when the messy hamburger commercials came out, and all the goo is coming out of the hamburgers, and it's all on the ground and stuff? I was in Southern California when the messy hamburger commercial program started with Carl's Jr. And so people would come into Carl's Jr. and they'd be like, I want that messy burger. And I was like, what? We can make any one of our burgers messy if you want. Yeah, you just squeeze it harder and it's messy. So people were coming in, and I was working the cash register. Now, so here's the other thing. It's a beach city where I was, Manhattan Beach. It's a beach city, got this job. And I remember the first day I was there, the manager was taking me on orientation. And he was showing me all the things. And ordinarily, you would start in the kitchen, flipping burgers and making things. But because this was Southern California, and because I happened to speak English really well, he wanted me on the front cash register. This is what he's telling me. He wanted me on the front cash register, and when I got good at that, I could do drive-through. And so I didn't flip a burger. I've worked fast food, but I'm the only person I know who's ever worked fast food who never flipped a burger. So it was all in the back. But he was taking me through the store, giving me the walkthrough, telling me the things I needed to know anyway, and he was telling me about the dining room and how it needed to be cleaned. And then something happened. Like his face went blank, all kind of starry-eyed. And he looked off into the distance, past my shoulder, and kind of, with glowing eyes, told me about this guy he knew, Josh or John or Dave, some former worker at this place. And he told me, that guy was the hardest worker I ever met. And it was like this nostalgic moment for him, where he was just gazing off into the distance, thinking about this wonderful worker that he had known some time before. And the weird thing happened to me. In that moment, a weird thing, I suddenly thought to myself, what in the world did that guy do to so impress this boss that years later he is pining away for, the days when Josh worked here, or Dave, or whatever his name was. And, the days when that guy worked here, because he was such a hard worker. And then at the same moment, I made this determination. Something else happened in my soul called competition. And I decided that if I was only going to be working here for 2 months, I was going to be the guy who 2 years from now, that manager would be taking some loser through this store, and he'd be saying, oh, but Jeff Michaels, he's the hardest worker I ever knew. I made this commitment. I was going to be the best worker this guy ever knew. Like 3 days later, I'm in the back washing potatoes. Hundreds of potatoes in a sink of cold water, scrubbing it with one of these Brillo pads, thinking to myself, what kind of commitment did I just make? One more story. This last week for me, I wanted to let you know a little bit of what my week was all about. I took notes on it. I jotted it down. Last Sunday, I talked about the Sabbath. So I took a Sabbath on Sunday. On Sunday afternoon, I From 1 o'clock to Monday at 1 o'clock, I took a 24-hour Sabbath. And then on Monday at 1 o'clock, my work week started. So on Monday afternoon and evening, I got on the computer to improve the efficiency of our live event site, because I had some people tell me last week that it wasn't working out for them, it wasn't updating as well, and so I wanted to improve the efficiency a little bit. Hopefully today it works a little bit better. Let me know, put it on your card. So I did that on Monday. On Tuesday morning, my daughter was sick, but my wife stayed home so that I could go to a couple meetings, and so I had a staff meeting that morning with Billy and Beth and Kevin, and that took almost till about 11:30, and we got to talking about some other things in the church, and we wandered around through the building and looked at some things going on in the building and stuff, and then Tuesday afternoon, I worked through the prayer requests, and I also made a discussion sheet for the life groups that were going on Tuesday night. Then Tuesday evening, I had an appointment at the local McDonald's down here on Veterans Memorial, and because there was this lady who couldn't decide whether or not church was really something she cared about exploring anymore. She's never been to our church. She's never been to any church since she's been out of the house growing up, and she's not sure it's worth her time. And so she was meeting with me, and I was trying to encourage her that, yeah, maybe it's worth your time, and it's okay, let's just talk. So that was Tuesday night. Then Wednesday, I had 2 different morning meetings, and I was watching my daughter at the house all afternoon because she was still sick, and my wife was back at her workplace. And so then in the afternoon, I did some strategic planning, and that evening I hosted a life group with my wife in our house. On Thursday, Billy and I drove up to Chicago for a one-day conference/seminar thing. And so from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., I was with Billy. And survived and everything. So we went up to the conference up in Chicago, and then we drove back. We almost went to IKEA, just because you have to. But, I mean, I really wanted some of their chocolate, because it's cheap, like everything else. And you don't have to assemble it yourself. But anyway, so we didn't stop there. We just came back. So Friday morning, I had parent-teacher conferences in the morning. And so I went to that. And then I spent most of the rest of the day fixing some problems with our Kiddopolis website and its check-in system. And that sounds like a pretty busy Monday through Friday, maybe. But there's one thing I didn't get to work on very much. And that's what I'm telling you right now, this message. I didn't get a lot of time this last week to work on even the message. And yet, for all you know, that's the only thing I ever do all week. So, I mean, how could I not? Anyway, my story is basically this. I have all kinds of great intentions. I have all kinds of desires to be the world's best worker. And even those people who are out there in the world who aren't great workers think they're great workers and wonder why the whole world around them doesn't acknowledge how great of a worker they are. And I just want to lay it out for you right now. I want to be a person of integrity. I want to be a person who works hard and who gets stuff done. And here's this truth. Hard work is hard work. It's hard to be diligent, to be a person of integrity. So what I want to do is I want to give you some leverage today. I want to give me some leverage today on how to become a diligent worker, how to put the energy of my life into the right places, so that if I take a Sabbath day, I'm also doing some productive stuff the other days of my week. And so I want to give you some leverage here. We're going to look at a number of different things that are in the Bible. And the first one is from a guy named Solomon. Some of you are familiar with this guy, Solomon. He was the wisest man who ever lived. In fact, people came from all over the ancient world to hear what he had to say. And in Proverbs 10, Solomon records for us some of the wise things that he said. Wisdom from Proverbs. And so Solomon records it. Proverbs 10 is really the beginning of this. And let's just read it. He says this in Proverbs 10, beginning of verse 4. Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. He who gathers crops in the summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. You see, this is the wisest guy. And I need to let you know a little bit about Proverbs. Proverbs is a book that's not trying to teach you stuff. Proverbs is not a book that's trying to promise you things. Proverbs is a book similar to Poor Richard's Almanac. You know, Benjamin Franklin wrote a stitch in time saves 9, a penny saved is a penny earned. You know those things. Proverbs is a collection of things that is the way the world is supposed to work. the way the world generally works. And if you live within the flow of how the world generally works, then you reap the benefits of how the world generally works. And Solomon, this wise man, is trying to describe for us how the world generally works. And what he says here is that hard work and diligence is what brings blessings. But we skipped over a few verses in there. Verses 6 through 8, I'd like to read for you now. Let's go ahead and hit those. It says this: blessings crown the head of the righteous, but violence overwhelms the mouth of the wicked. The name of the righteous is used in blessings, but the name of the wicked will rot. The wise in heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. You see, what's going on here is that Solomon is recording for us a bunch of different little statements, and they can and should all be taken individually. But he has somehow decided to put them together in this grouping for some reason. Hard work starts with 2 verses there, and then he talks about integrity in verse 9, and in between the two, it's all about righteousness and wisdom. Righteousness and wisdom. See, what I believe Solomon is trying to do is he's trying to connect all these thoughts together. He's trying to connect diligence and integrity and righteousness and wisdom all together in the same thing and say that's what it means to live the way God wants you to live. So jot this down if you're taking notes. A God-honoring life is characterized by integrity and hard work. A God-honoring life is characterized by integrity and hard work. So, if you read that passage, it might sound just like another thing to add to your to-do list. I got to do it. Maybe some of you, it feels like a burden. You know, when I hear words like work harder, it just strikes a chord in me because I never feel like I work hard enough. I never do. I'm always feeling like there's more that can be done. No matter how much time I put into something, no matter how much I accomplish on something, I always feel like there's more I could be doing, and I always feel like I should be doing it. There's a sense of guilt. And when you read verses like we just read, there might be a sense of guilt or fear or concern that you have. But I want you to know something else. Moses wrote something. Way back in the book that we call Genesis, Moses wrote. And remember, Moses is the guy who climbs up onto a mountain and he sees God somehow. Now, God doesn't have a physical face, but we're told that Moses saw God face to face. And what that meant for Moses is that he saw some bright, incredibly glowing, shiny experience. And so bright that when he came back down off the mountain, Moses' own face was still glowing. It was like, you know, when you hold up one of those glow-in-the-dark somethings to a bright light and then you take it away and then it glows by itself. That's like Moses. God is so bright that he made Moses glow. And so this Moses guy hears from God how it all began. The story of Adam and Eve. And we believe Adam and Eve are real people because Jesus believed they were real people. And so Moses writes this story about Adam and Eve and he puts it down and we read a little bit of that in Genesis chapter 2. In fact, it says this: the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. Now, this is amazing to me. See, when I was a kid, I thought this. God took Adam and Eve, he put them in the Garden of Eden, and all they had to do was just eat fruit and live. You know, just hang out, grab a peach, eat it, pet a dog, run around, swim in the water, you know, just have fun. Do whatever it is that you do when you're living in the world's most perfect paradise. And I thought that would be awesome. You know, lifetime, all the time, vacation, just never have to do any work. And yet, the verse here tells us that when God put Adam into this perfect place, it was so he could work. Nothing bad has happened yet. Adam and Eve hadn't eaten from the tree. There's no sin in the world yet. God has just created everything. He's just made it all perfect. He just made Adam, and he puts Adam in paradise to work. There's work that happens in paradise. That means that when you're in the place that is the absolute best, most awesome place for you, you're doing work. In other words, write this down. Human beings were created to work. Human beings were made to work. God designed us with that. Let's keep going. One more section. This time we're going to look at something that Paul wrote. Now remember, Paul was a guy, he hated Jesus, and then he met Jesus, and then he loved Jesus, and then he writes most of the New Testament. And so when Paul writes stuff, he's writing because he really wants people to get the same thing that he's got. He really wants people to know that this Jesus who came and lived and died rose again, and that changes everything. And so Paul writes a letter, and he writes a letter to a church in Corinth because they've got all kinds of problems. And so Paul is trying to help them deal with their problems and make some tough decisions. And we find in 1 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it says this, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever." Paul is saying, hey, listen, I'm working just as hard as any athlete. And athletes get things that you hang around your neck and it fades, it tarnishes, it dies, it gets stolen, something. But I'm doing something for a treasure that's going to last forever. He says, do you not know? Let's go to the next one. He says, "Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." And there it is. See, the prize he's talking about has something to do with what he's been preaching. Paul has just been for years trying to tell people that if they put their faith in Jesus, the one who rose from the dead, if they put their faith in him, sins are forgiven, hearts are cleansed, life is experienced, and eternity is promised. Paul has been preaching this. He's been teaching people for a while now that they can have an eternal kind of life beginning today and lasting forever. He says, I want that prize for myself. And so I want to be a person of integrity. If I've been telling other people about it, I want to live by it myself. And notice what he does to live by it. He says, I strike a blow to my body. Other translations say, I beat my body. Now, I don't think Paul is actually walking around with a stick, hitting himself all the time. I don't think Paul is walking around and every time he sees a pretty girl, he punches himself in the face. I don't think that's what he's doing, okay? What I think he's saying is that every morning he wakes up and he recognizes it doesn't matter what my body feels like, I'm going to get out and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to tell more people about Jesus, and I'm going to live it myself the same way. And so if the world out there, Paul would even say this, he says, if the world out there is eating meat and drinking alcohol without any concerns of any sort, he says, listen, I know there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with any of that kind of partying, but I'm not going to do it. Because I know there are people who are watching me, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to live my life with integrity, and I'm going to work as hard as it takes to live with this kind of integrity. And so Paul does integrity and hard work in his spiritual life. In fact, write that down. Paul does his spiritual life with integrity and with diligence. This is fascinating to me. What we've just covered is we've covered some teaching from the Bible. We've covered some teaching from God's Word that tries to identify how important it is to work hard. And I don't know how you're feeling after hearing some of these things, but I'll say it again. I feel guilty. I honestly feel like I can't measure up. I feel like the Apostle Paul is so committed to his faith that he'd be willing to beat his body to keep it in line with what he wants to be doing. I feel guilty. I don't feel like I can measure up. Maybe you're in the same place. Now, maybe you're one of those workaholics and you just need to listen to last week's message about taking some time off now and then. But maybe you're like me and you're like, staying motivated, doing hard work is hard work. Maybe you just feel a little bit guilty. I'm not doing enough. Well, I want to give you some perspective. I want to give you a pivot point today that can help turn your attention into a new way of thinking about all this. And that comes from Colossians. This is also Paul's writing. In Colossians chapter 3, beginning in verse 22, Paul writes something else to a different group of people who have slightly different problems, and he wants them to know something about hard work, okay? It says this, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Now, stop there for just a moment. We'll come back to the rest of this. But I want to just explain to you just a little bit of what Paul is saying when he talks about slaves and masters. Here it is. First of all, the most important thing for you to remember is that for Paul's day, slavery was different from the kind of slavery that was practiced in the United States a few years ago. See, in the United States, slavery meant you owned someone, and you could do with that person whatever you wanted to do, and quite frequently it was mean. In Paul's day, slavery didn't exactly mean you owned someone. It kind of meant that. A slave owner could beat the slave. A slave owner could actually kill the slave. That was considered okay because the slave owner could do that kind of stuff. But what was different is that slavery was the only category of employee that existed back then. You see, you had a few categories of people. You had landowners, people who owned land, and so they were wealthy by what the land produced. They could go out, they could farm it themselves. They were wealthy because of what the land produced. You had the category of slaves, who were people who worked for others. And then you had the category of homeless, who were the people who either begged or got periodic employment. That was the way it worked. And then, of course, you had soldiers who worked for the government, and the government paid their salary. And politicians, they existed too as well, but most of them were also landowners and stuff. So for the majority of people, you either owned land, and that was your income, you were a slave, or you were homeless. That's the way it worked. And so for slaves back then, it's equivalent to what we consider employees today in many respects. So, if you are an employee, I want you to hear the word slaves and make sure you're in that category. If you're an employer, I want you to hear the word masters and make sure you're in that category. And some of you in this room are both. You're under someone else and you're over someone else, and so you're a boss of some and you're working for others, and so you're in both camps. Let's just see where it takes us. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Here's the first little bit of perspective I want to give you. A new perspective on diligence and hard work. It goes like this. Hard work is worship. Hard work is worship. You see, at the end of that passage that we just looked at, it said that we need to do this in reverence for the Lord. In reverence for the Lord. This is what, okay, put yourself in the mindset of a slave. And someone comes up to you and they say, do everything your master tells you to do. Aren't you going to be just a little bit resentful? Some of you are probably that way right now. You know, you feel like a slave in your job, and we just read Paul say, do everything your master tells you to do. If I said that to you right now, same thing. Whatever your boss asks you to do, without question, do it immediately, all the way. If I said that to you, what kind of thoughts go in your head? Well, lots of worry, you know. What about this? What if he asked me that? And I know some of you are the kind of employees where you do most of the work your boss tells you to do, and then the other stuff you don't think is the right thing to do, you just don't do. Or maybe some of you are sort of the passive-aggressive employee where your boss asks you to do something and you do exactly what he said, exactly the way he said it, to the letter, because you know it's not going to work that way, and then you let it fail, and I did what he told me to do. I don't know what kind of employee you are. I'm not exactly sure what kind of employee I am sometimes. So anyway, but when you hear that thought, do whatever he tells you to do, there's a little bit of you that cringes, I imagine. Because what you want to say is, you want to say, wait a minute, God, I don't really like this situation that I'm in. And I don't really like this boss that I have. And I'm not sure he's asking me to do the right thing. And I'm not sure that's really going to work out in this situation. And I've got more experience than this kid who just came out of business school and he got put over me as management or whatever. I don't know what thoughts are going through our heads, but I know what thoughts might go through a slave's head. Why am I even here? And honestly, that's the answer. God says, do what your masters tell you to, because that's where you are. You almost hear in Paul's words here, when he says, slaves, do what your masters tell you to, you almost hear a whisper behind the scenes. A whisper where Paul is saying, and it's okay for you to be a slave. That's fine. And you're wondering, well, why doesn't Paul talk about, liberation and freedom? Why doesn't he say, slaves, get out of your slavery? Slaves, get away from your masters. Slaves, run away. Why doesn't he say something like that? Yeah, maybe there's a part of it that's cultural, but still, the slave is like, I want my freedom. I wish I were in the position of the person who owns slaves, not the person who is a slave. Why am I here? And you can hear a whisper in what Paul is saying, as if God is whispering through Paul's words to say, it's okay where you are right now. You see, this is an act of worship. If I say, I am where I am because God wants me here for now, what you have just said is God is number one. What you've just said is God is in charge. And anytime you acknowledge that God is in charge, that's worship. And so Paul says, you do this out of reverence for Christ. You do this out of reverence for Him. When you do what your boss tells you to do, what you're actually doing is you're saying, God, I know you've put me here. And God, I know you've told him or her to tell me to do this thing. Now, unless it's completely outside of what the Bible tells us is true, unless it's completely outside of what's morally right and wrong, then whatever the guy asks you to do or girl asks you to do as your boss or whatever, you could just say, God, I'm doing this because I honor you. You're the one in charge. And you chose me to be in this position, in this place, for this time right now. So I do what they told me to do, but I'm doing it for you. That's the first thing. There are two other motives that Paul gives us here. Reasons for us to be diligent workers and be workers with integrity. And here are two more reasons. Let's look at the next section. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, working for the Lord. Let's go on to the next slide. He says, anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Write this down. All work gets repaid. All work gets repaid. In this passage, we're told that even if your boss isn't watching you, someone is. Jesus is still watching. And He rewards the hard work, and He punishes the bad work. All work gets repaid. When I was in junior high, I remember I was in science class once, and there's a teacher, I don't remember her name, I remember some of the things she taught us. To this day, I still remember that the guy who invented the hypodermic syringe, his last name was Wood, because she told me that just imagine a hypodermic syringe, and a needle, a shot being stuck in a block of wood, and she said, you'll never forget that. And I laughed at her, because it was so dumb, and I never forgot it. But anyway, so she was up at the front of the room once, and she turned her back to write something on the board. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and I saw a little piece of paper crumpled up fly from this side of the room to that side of the room. And she turned around and she taught the class something more, and then she went back to the board, and the piece of paper went whoop, back to the other side. And then she turned around, she talked to the class some more, and then she went back to the board. Now 3 papers went whoop to this side. Before 5 minutes was up, every time she turned her back, full-on paper war. I mean, it looked like popcorn in the room. As soon as she turned her back, it was just like whoosh. Everything was flying left and right. Then there was an airplane that someone had made, and there was crumpled up wads of paper, and it's all going this, and then she would turn back around just after we had let it all settle. And then she'd turn around again, and it would happen again. Finally, she turned around just a little bit too soon to see the last few papers falling to the ground, and she noticed the floor of the room was covered with white. It looked like it had snowed in there. And she did exactly this, no joke. She grabbed the sides of her head and pulled her hair all the way out to her arm's length and went, ah, and screamed, and then left the room. No one threw any paper. We're just stunned. Like about 5 minutes later, the principal of the school came in, and we all got detention. It wasn't one of these, who started it, stand up, admit it, tell the rest of it. It was just flat. We all got our detention for that day or whatever it was, and that was just the end of the story. But here's the deal. Jesus never turns his back. And he's always watching, and he always repays. So the second motivation, number one, is if I do hard work, it's worship. Number two, if I don't do hard work or I do hard work, it's all going to get repaid. So whether you're the kind of person who likes positive motivation or you're the kind of person who wants to avoid the negative motivation, it all works for you, okay? So hard work, all work, any work, bad work, it all gets repaid. The third motivation here, though, comes in the same verse we just looked at, plus the end. Let's read it again. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Let's go on to the next one. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there's no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. And in this last verse, Paul turns his attention back to the masters, and he tells them they need to be right and fair with their employees. But there's a hint going on here that unlocks everything else in the passage, and it's at the very end. The masters have a master. If you think you're in charge, think again. You're not. Even the masters have a master. And this is Paul's point at the very end to sort of pull it all together. He says the last motivation you need, the most important motivation you need to be a diligent worker, a hard worker, is to understand this. My real boss is in heaven. My real boss is in heaven. And so whatever's going on here in this world, I'm going to work my tail off. I'm going to do it well. I'm going to be a person of integrity and diligence because my real boss is in heaven. And see, this is the amazing thing. Your real boss is the one who sent his son to die for you, to forgive you, to cleanse you from all sense of guilt and shame. Your real boss is the one who's got a retirement plan like you can't imagine. I mean, it's really, really good, and it doesn't run out of money. Your real boss is so much better than any earthly boss you've ever had. And in fact, he's your boss right now, regardless of what earthly boss you have. And so you want to be a person of diligence and integrity for him. Not out of guilt, out of worship, out of gratitude, out of recognition of his blessings, and out of just the fact that he's the one who's really in charge. Listen. All the stuff that we've been talking about, I think Paul is just trying to put it all into a package for us to help us actually live out diligence. My sense is that I'm always worried. Am I doing the right thing? Am I putting in enough time? Am I focusing on the right things? Am I working hard enough? Am I accomplishing all the good things that I need to do and avoiding all the bad things I need to do? If you've got a more traditional boss relationship, you might be worried, is he telling me to do the thing just because he doesn't like me? Or what's the social dynamics? But here's the bottom line. Christians should be the best workers in the world because everything we do is for our God and King and the one who made the universe. That's who we're working for. So I want to end our time today with just a push. I want to give you a push in the right direction, give you a suggestion of one thing you can begin to do to help shift your perspective this week so that you can be a hard, diligent worker. You can make the hard decisions to do the hard work, even when it doesn't feel like it. And you can even do what your boss asks you to do, even if you don't want to do it, and you can do it well. And one of these days, he's going to look off into this and be like, you know, those Christians, they're the hardest workers I ever knew. Here's a push, hopefully to get you off on the right foot. This week, I want to encourage you, every single day, have a staff meeting with your real boss. Every morning this week, have a staff meeting with your real boss. I'm going to do this myself. This is an experiment. It's a challenge for all of us. What I'm going to do, what I ask you to do, join me, is that this week I'm going to sit down in the morning. I'm going to take my Bible. I'm going to read a little bit. I'm going to pray a little bit. I'm going to write some thoughts down on a piece of paper. And I'm going to take out my to-do list. I'm going to set my to-do list right down in front of me, and I'm going to be like, okay, God, this is all the stuff that I thought was important for me today. This is all the stuff that I thought I needed to do. This is all the stuff that people tell me I need to be doing. And God, I'm coming to you because you're my real boss. Help me to identify how to be a hard, diligent worker, a person of integrity with regard to these things. Now, I don't believe that God is going to boom a voice in a burning bush in the middle of my living room. I just don't think that's going to happen. If it does, I'll let you know. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think what he's probably going to do is he's going to give me some thoughts and he's going to give me some insights. And he's going to help me get a perspective on these things that I think are important for me to do. And as I'm looking at the list, the main thing is that my heart says, when I check something off this list, it's for my God. And when I complete something on this list, it's for my God. And if anyone else tells me to do something and I need to do it because that's my job, that's my responsibility, sure, I'll do it, but I'm doing it for my God because he's my real boss. Let me just invite you right now to take some time and think about it. To go ahead and take out that Connect card and spend a little bit of time in reflection and just ask God this question. God, if I have a staff meeting with you this week, will you give me some insight? Ask God this question. God, what does it mean for me to really see you as my real boss? Thank you for listening to this message from Lafayette Community Church. We believe that God has a full and fulfilling life in store for you, and we want to help you live it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Pastor Jeff, through the web form at LafayetteCommunityChurch.com. And as always, I encourage you to plug into a solid, God-honoring community wherever you may be. Life is a journey, and no one should ever walk alone.